I'll just ask our audience a question, first of all. If you'd raise your hands. How many of you believe in God? Okay, a forest of hands. So, Richard Dawkins, these people are deluded. Every single one of them.
Well, I fear that's right, yes. I would say it's rather like the phenomenon of the imaginary friend that children have and that comfort them and console them. But there's actually not the slightest shred of evidence that any kind of supernatural being exists. So I'm sorry to say, deluded, yes.
Deluded. How can so many people be wrong?
Well, there was a time when everybody believed that the world was flat. There was a time when everybody believed that the sun whizzed round the earth. People are very, very frequently deluded. And by the way, of course, there was a time when people believed in Zeus and Apollo, and in other parts of the world they believed in Thor and Wotan. People have believed in fairies and leprechauns. Everybody in this room, I would guess, knows what it's like not to believe in the God of some other religion. You know that if you happen to be born in the Middle East, you'll probably be Muslim. And people who are born in the Middle East believe equally fervently in their God. They can't both be right. There are so many different gods that people have believed in throughout history.
So what people believe is really an accident of geography?
Exactly right, yes. I think that religion teaches people to stop questioning. The way I see it, it is such a privilege to be born at all. It's a very improbable event that either of us were born. We have the privilege of being in this universe for a few decades. And during that time, it is an enormous privilege to be able to understand something about the universe in which we live, why we're here, why we were ever born, where we come from. And I think that is such a wonderful thing to be able to do that I am hostile. I can get angry about competing accounts which seem to me to not encourage that kind of questioning, but instead to say, this is how it is, it's all written in the Holy Book, it was written 2,000 years ago, and that's the end of it. I think that deprives people. I think that is such a belittling, a demeaning view of the universe, and I think it's tragic that children are brought up with that when they could be brought up in a more open-minded way. So that's one reason for the anger. The other reason we've touched upon, it is that I do think that faith, unsupported by evidence, is a lethal weapon. Doesn't have to be, of course it doesn't have to be, but it can be. It's a weapon because possibly unscrupulous people can get hold of often young men and use them as weapons, use them as human bombs. And the only reason they can be deployed as human bombs is that they have been brought up from childhood onwards to believe implicitly, without question, that whatever the particular religion is, the details don't matter. The point is that they do believe that it is the will of God that they should detonate themselves and blow up a busload of people or blow up a skyscraper in New York. I don't think that any kind of reasoned argument would do that to people. The idea of believing something without any evidence tends to make people prepared to do terrible things in the name of their God, because they believe that their God wants them to be a martyr, and they'll go straight to paradise if they do. There's only a minority of them who do that, only an extreme minority. But if the majority of children are brought up to believe that there's some virtue in faith, that there's some virtue in believing something without any evidence, then it will only take a minority to take that really seriously. In a sense, the suicide bombers are the ones who really, really take their religion seriously. And the gentle ones who don't do suicide bombing, they're the ones who don't really take it seriously. But as Sam Harris has said, these people really believe what they say they believe. And they believe it without evidence. And if you believe something without evidence, and if you're taught that it's a virtue, to believe something without evidence, then there's no argument that can sway you. Because I can't come along and say, look, I think you're wrong about this because. They say, no, 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 stuff fingers in ears. I've been taught. This is faith. You can't touch my faith. The origin of the cosmos was, I suspect, an extremely simple event. And simple events are very simple to understand and explain. Once upon a time, not that long ago, a couple of centuries ago, the question would not have been, why is there something rather than nothing? The question would have been, why is there all this magnificent life? Why are there trees? Why is there grass? Why are there birds? Why are there humans? Darwin answered that question and blew out of the water the theistic answer to that question. Theists are now driven back to this much, much more simple question: why is there something rather than nothing? Everything else is either explained or well on the way to being explained. We're left with just one little tiny smidgen of a gap in which God is alleged to be hiding. But even if you invoke a supernatural creator to explain why is there something rather than nothing, you still explained absolutely nothing, because you're left without an explanation for that God himself. We are incredibly social animals, as I said before, and when somebody does you a good turn, it's important to be grateful. It's important to pay back the favor and to express your gratitude. And that, I suggest, might generalize the psychological predisposition to feel grateful when something good happens to you. Might generalize from feeling grateful when a person does something good for you, and when the weather does, say. When an accident happens, when there's an earthquake and your child doesn't die, you feel grateful. And you feel the need to be grateful to something or somebody. And you can't feel grateful to other people because they're not responsible for the weather. So you conjure up a fictitious person to feel grateful to. And that's a special case, really, of the idea that it's good survival practice to suspect agents in nature. A lot of what happens in nature doesn't have an agent deliberately causing it. A lot of it is the weather, a lot of it is the wind, a lot of it is just plain accidents that happen. But when there are agents around, and where those agents might be lions or leopards or crocodiles, who might be lurking in wait for you, or might be stalking you, then it's important for your survival to attribute agency to things. And that may generalize even to places where there's no agency. And I've often used the example of a rustling in the long grass, which could be the wind, is actually most likely to be the wind, but which could be a lion. And although the odds are that it's the wind, your best bet is probably to assume that it's a lion, because if you get the bet wrong, if you bet on it being the wind and your bet is wrong, that's rather tragic. So there may be a psychological predisposition to invent agents where there aren't any. And this same psychological predisposition generalizes itself to wind gods and thunder gods and lightning gods and river gods and sea gods and things like that, which then become merged later on in cultural evolution into the named gods like Thor and Zeus and Apollo and Yahweh. I think that religion should be criticized on intellectual grounds as providing a competitor to the scientific explanation of life and the universe. It's educationally pernicious because it gives the idea that you can evade the responsibility to understand things by postulating some sort of easy explanation. Oh, God did it. I think that's educationally pernicious. And as a scientist and as an educator, I'm most interested in that. If you base medicine on science, you cure people. If you base the design of planes on science, they fly. If you base the design of rockets on science, they reach the moon. It works, bitches.